What if I told you that beneath the surface of every kind, ethical, and compassionate person lies the potential for cruelty? It sounds shocking, even offensive, but pause for a moment and imagine this someone you admire deeply. Maybe a teacher, a mentor, or even a loved one slowly begins to change. Not in obvious ways at first. A shrug at injustice, a nod of obedience to something they once questioned, a silence when they once would have spoken out. Now imagine that person becomes unrecognizable. Not a villain in a movie, but a real human being. Someone just like you or me. What would have to happen for a good person to turn bad? This isn't a rare random twist of fate. It's not some isolated anomaly that pops up once in a while like lightning from a clear sky. No, this is a pattern, a deeply human pattern woven through the fabric of history, society, and psychology. And today we're diving headfirst into one of the most unsettling, eye-opening questions about human nature. Why do good people do bad things? By the end of this video, you won't just understand the shocking psychological mechanisms that can push ordinary people into darkness. You'll also discover how to recognize them, and more importantly, how to resist them. And the final insight. It might just be the most powerful tool you'll ever carry with you for the rest of your life. This isn't just a history lesson or a psychology lecture. This is a mirror, one that forces us to look inward and ask a haunting question: what would I do in their place? Could I be swayed? Stay with me. What you'll learn today may forever change the way you see the world and yourself. The Lucifer effect. A glimpse into the darkness within. The term Lucifer effect was coined by social psychologist Dr. Philip Zimbardo. If his name sounds familiar, it's probably because of one of the most infamous and disturbing studies in psychology, the Stanford Prison Experiment. In this study, a group of ordinary college students were randomly assigned to play the roles of either prisoners or guards in a simulated prison environment. What happened next was both shocking and deeply revealing. Within just days, the students assigned as guards began to exhibit abusive, dehumanizing behavior. Those playing prisoners, they fell into despair, submission, and emotional breakdowns. But here's the truly disturbing part. These weren't bad people. They were bright, well-adjusted young adults. What changed them wasn't some flaw in their character, it was the situation, the environment, the role, the perceived authority. And this is what Zimbardo revealed: under the right conditions, anyone, yes, even the kindest among us, can be transformed into someone capable of cruelty. It's not comforting to hear. But history backs it up time and time again. History's haunting echoes when ordinary becomes evil. Let's zoom out for a moment and look at the bigger picture. Think about the guards in Nazi concentration camps, the soldiers involved in ethnic cleansing, the civilians who stood by and did nothing as their neighbors were taken, silenced, or worse. These weren't born monsters. Many were loving parents, neighbors, co-workers, people who once laughed, loved, and shared meals with others. So what happened? What makes a teacher become a torturer? A family man turned into a foot soldier of oppression. It's not always ideology. It's not always hatred. More often, it's environment, groupthink, and silent surrender to authority. And this brings us to the first major force in the Lucifer effect. 1. The power of authority. When obedience overrides morality. In the 1960s, psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted a series of experiments that are as chilling as they are unforgettable. Participants were instructed to deliver electric shocks to another person whenever they answered a question incorrectly. The victim was actually an actor and not truly harmed, but the participants didn't know that. Here's the terrifying part: most participants kept delivering shocks even when the victim screamed, begged for mercy, or went silent. Why? Because an authority figure in a lab coat told them to continue. Let that sink in. Ordinary people, were willing to inflict extreme pain on another human being just because someone with a clipboard said it's necessary. How often do we obey without questioning? How many times have you followed a rule at work or accepted a policy you didn't fully agree with just because it came from someone in charge? Would you speak up if your boss asked you to bend your ethics just a little? What if a government or a leader told you it was for the greater good? Milgram's experiment showed just how dangerously easy it is to outsource our morality to authority. 2. The power of dehumanization, seeing them as less than us. Another weapon in this psychological arsenal is dehumanization, the act of stripping others of their humanity. Once a person or group is labeled as the enemy, vermin, animals, or evil, it becomes far easier to justify cruelty against them. This tactic isn't new. It's been used in every genocide, every war crime, every ideological conflict in history. Because it's much easier to hurt a label than a living, breathing human being. Now pause for a moment and then consider how we talk about people today in politics, on social media, even in casual conversation. How often do you hear phrases like, they're all idiots? Those people are ruining everything. They don't deserve sympathy. It's subtle but devastating. The moment we reduce someone to a category, a stereotype, or a punchline, we weaken our own empathy and strengthen the seeds of cruelty. 3. Social roles and group dynamics, becoming the part we're given. Let's return to the Stanford prison experiment for a moment. What made those students act so cruelly wasn't just authority, it was the role they were given. They weren't told to abuse anyone. But once labeled as guards, they quickly slipped into the part. Likewise, the prisoners internalized their assigned powerlessness. It happened faster than anyone expected. That's the terrifying truth of social roles. We don't just play them, we become them. Think about your own life. At work, at home, online, how much of your behavior is shaped by the role you think you're supposed to play? Do you act differently when you're around your boss, your friends, or a stranger online? Are you expressing who you are or who you think you're expected to be? Roles aren't inherently bad. But when we lose sight of our individuality, when we surrender too fully to the expectations around us, we risk becoming shadows of ourselves. Recognizing the forces around us. Here's the uncomfortable truth: authority, dehumanization, social roles, and group dynamics. These aren't abstract theories. They're everywhere, in our offices, in our families, in classrooms, media, politics, and even online comment sections. The first step to resisting them is seeing them. Have you ever been in a situation where you stayed silent to keep the peace even though something felt wrong? That's the moment the slope begins to tilt. And here's where it gets even more crucial. The tipping point, when a good person crosses the line. No one wakes up and decides to be the villain. The fall into darkness doesn't happen in a single leap. It happens in inches. A compromise here, a lie there, a shrug instead of action. Over time, these small decisions gather like snowflakes, and before we know it, a moral avalanche. Ask yourself, have you ever justified something wrong because it was easier, because it was safer, because everyone else was doing it? Those small moments matter. They shape who we become. And that's why it's so important to recognize the warning signs before the slope gets too steep. Are some people immune to the Lucifer effect? It's a fair question, and one that echoes through every study and debate on human morality. Are some people simply stronger, more virtuous? Is there a type of person who could never be swayed? The truth: no one is entirely immune. Yes, traits like high empathy, strong self-awareness, and moral courage can act like armor. But under extreme pressure, fear, power, groupthink, even the most principled person can falter. Carl Jung, the famed Swiss psychiatrist, called this the shadow, the dark side of ourselves we'd rather not see. The anger, envy, pride, cruelty, all lurking beneath our polished surface. Jung believed that true self-awareness comes not from denying the shadow, but from confronting it, owning it, learning from it. Because if we don't see the potential for darkness in ourselves, we're far more likely to be controlled by it. Conclusion: a new best way to see ourselves in the world. So what now? The goal here isn't to scare you, it's to wake you up, to help you recognize the invisible forces shaping your thoughts, actions, and choices. The Lucifer effect teaches us that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a smile. Sometimes it looks like obedience. Sometimes it looks like silence. But when we recognize these forces, when we question, instead of blindly follow, when we choose to see the humanity in others, we take a step towards something stronger than fear or power. We take a step toward conscious, deliberate goodness, the kind that resists pressure, the kind that stands up even when it's hard, the kind that doesn't just avoid darkness, but shines a light. So I leave you with this: what kind of person are you becoming, and who do you choose to be when no one's watching? Stay aware, stay awake, and above all, stay human. But what happens when we ignore that quiet inner voice telling us something isn't right? In the last section, we touched on how the shadow, The darker side of human nature can take control when left unchecked. Now let's delve deeper. What happens when this shadow doesn't just whisper but takes over completely? When we rationalize wrong actions and even begin to believe they are justified. Have you ever made a snap decision in a moment of anger, fear, or passion, only to later feel a wave of deep regret wash over you? That moment, that slip of conscience, it's the shadow at work, and if we don't recognize it, if we don't confront it, it can grow subtly, silently, until one day we find ourselves far from the person we believe we were. This progression, when left unchallenged, is part of what psychologists refer to as the Lucifer effect, the transformation of ordinary people into agents of harm. But here's the hopeful truth. Awareness is our greatest weapon. When we understand the psychological forces that lead to moral collapse, we gain the ability to resist them. And one of the most powerful and insidious forces at play is something known as moral disengagement. Coined by renowned psychologist Albert Bandura, moral disengagement refers to the way people disconnect from their moral standards so they can behave unethically without feeling guilt. Essentially, it's how we trick ourselves into thinking that wrong isn't really wrong. Take a moment to think about it. Have you ever heard someone say, everyone else is doing it, or the end justifies the means? These aren't just empty phrases. They are psychological shields people use to protect themselves from discomfort, to avoid the sting of guilt. And slowly they create a dangerous mental distance between the person and their actions. In real life, this plays out more often than we'd like to admit. A student cheats on a test thinking it's just a one-time shortcut. A manager cuts corners or mistreats employees, justifying it in the name of efficiency or company goals. Deep down, they might still believe in fairness and honesty, but moral disengagement gives them permission to ignore those values just for a moment. And those moments add up. So what's the antidote? Psychologists often point to something called moral vigilance, the ability to actively examine our own actions and decisions, especially when it's uncomfortable. It means pausing to ask yourself, am I justifying something that I know deep down is wrong? It's not always easy. In fact, it can be painfully difficult. But that discomfort is where growth begins. Another powerful defense is empathy. Empathy is the ability to truly see others, not as abstract figures or opponents, but as human beings. People with feelings, dreams, and fears just like our own. And when we connect with others on that level, it becomes infinitely harder to dehumanize or harm them. This is why storytelling art and genuine human connection are so powerful. They crack open the shell of apathy. They remind us of our shared humanity. They make us feel, and in feeling, they make us care. But what about the broader forces, the ones beyond individual actions? What about systems, institutions, entire societies? This is where leadership and collective responsibility enter the picture. Throughout history, we've seen how powerful leaders can shape the moral direction of entire nations. Think of Adolf Hitler, who fueled hatred and fear to justify the unthinkable. Now contrast that with figures like Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr., who used their influence to promote peace, dignity, and justice. One path led to destruction, the other to transformation. So ask yourself, what kind of leaders do we choose to follow? And perhaps more importantly, what kind of influence do we have? Even if we don't hold official titles or roles, each of us has influence within our families, our communities, our workplaces. The question is, do we use it to uplift or to divide, to inspire or to manipulate? Take a quiet moment to reflect. Who are the people you admire most? What values do they represent? And just as crucial, what kind of example are you setting for those around you? As we explore forces like authority, moral, disengagement, empathy, and leadership, one truth becomes crystal clear. The real battle between good and evil doesn't just take place out in the world, it begins within each of us. The choices we make, the small ones, especially shape the path we walk. But here's the empowering part. The same psychological tools that can lead people astray can also guide us toward greatness. The same mechanisms that allow cruelty can also be harnessed for compassion, justice, and moral courage. So the question becomes, how do we stay on the right path? How do we build the strength to resist the lure of the Lucifer effect when it comes knocking? How do we stay grounded when the winds of pressure, fear, or temptation threaten to carry us away? The answers lie ahead. In the next section, we'll uncover practical, proven strategies for recognizing and resisting the psychological traps that lead to moral failure. These tools are grounded in both psychology and spirituality, and they've been tested not just in theory, but in the lives of real people who faced extraordinary moral challenges. But before we get there, we need to understand one last essential truth. Awareness alone is not enough. To truly resist the forces that pull us off course, we need more than just insight. We need action. We need habits, mindset shifts, and daily practices that train our moral muscles. And at the heart of all of it lies one of the most powerful defenses we possess: moral courage. Moral courage is the ability to do what's right even when it's hard, even when you're scared, alone, or at risk of losing something important. It's what drives someone to speak up against injustice, to admit a mistake, or to defend someone who's vulnerable, even when staying silent would be safer. But let's be clear, moral courage isn't something you're born with, it's something you build. Think of Rosa Parks, who refused to give up her seat, sparking a movement that changed history, or whistleblowers who risked their careers and safety to expose wrongdoing. These individuals didn't act because they were fearless, they acted because their values were stronger than their fear. So how do we develop that kind of courage in our own lives? First, by identifying our core values. What do you stand for? Honesty, compassion, justice, accountability. When you know what matters most to you, you create a moral compass that helps guide you through the fog of difficult decisions. Second, through mental rehearsal. Imagine yourself in ethically challenging situations. What would you do if you witnessed bullying at work? How would you respond if asked to bend the truth? By visualizing these moments in advance, you prepare your mind and your heart to act with integrity when it matters most. In the previous section, we explored the power of moral courage, how choosing integrity over silence, even in small moments, can help protect us from slipping into the shadows. But courage doesn't grow in isolation. It needs nourishment, support, and intention. And that's where we continue. Step 3, build a support system. If courage is the flame, then our support system is the oxygen that keeps it burning. Surrounding yourself with people who share your core values, honesty, empathy, accountability, creates a protective circle around your moral compass. These aren't just companions. They become your mirrors and anchors. When you're tempted to conform or look the other way, these people help keep you grounded. They remind you who you are when the world tries to make you forget. Think about it. Isn't it easier to stand up for what's right when you know someone has your back? When you know you're not alone in believing that kindness and integrity still matter? Recognizing the influence of our environment. But what happens when we find ourselves in environments that seem built to erode our values? Workplaces that reward unethical shortcuts, social circles that thrive on gossip, or communities where silence is mistaken for peace. This is where situational awareness becomes absolutely critical. It's the ability to read the room, not just what's being said, but what's being allowed. What are the group norms? What behavior is considered acceptable, even if it shouldn't be? Let's say you enter a workplace where casual disrespect is the norm. Jokes at someone's expense, exclusion of certain voices, unethical decisions masked as just business. Over time, it becomes easy to adopt the same behaviors, not because you agree, but because it feels safer to blend in. But ask yourself, is this really right, or have I just gotten used to it because everyone else has? The power of small actions. When facing systems that feel too big to fight, it's easy to feel powerless. But here's the truth. Even the smallest acts of resistance carry power. Like pebbles dropped in water, they create ripples that spread farther than we can see. A single voice raised in opposition to unethical practices can encourage others to speak up. A kind word to someone overlooked can challenge an entire culture of dehumanization. These moments may seem insignificant in isolation, but combined they form the quiet backbone of social change. So ask yourself, in your everyday life, what small choices are you making? Are they reinforcing harm or healing? The role of self-reflection. This brings us to another powerful tool. Self-reflection. The philosopher Socrates once said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And in the context of resisting moral failure, these words ring louder than ever. Self-reflection isn't about perfection, it's about progress. It's about developing the habit of looking inward and asking hard questions. What motivated me today? Did I act with empathy? Did I avoid a hard truth because it was uncomfortable? Or did I stay silent when I should have spoken up by making reflection? A regular practice, whether through journaling, meditation, or quiet thought, we train ourselves to act with greater integrity. Over time, this awareness sharpens our ability to respond with intention, not impulse. Can the Lucifer effect ever be fully neutralized? It's a question many ask, and understandably so. With so many psychological forces stacked against us, is it even possible to truly resist? Psychologist Philip Zimbardo, who coined the term Lucifer effect, suggests that the key lies in cultivating what he calls the heroic imagination. This mindset encourages everyday people to believe that they can make a difference, that heroism is not reserved for the extraordinary few, but available to all of us in the choices we make daily. Start small. Practice what you might call micro-heroism. Stand up for someone being mistreated. Offer help where it's needed. Choose empathy over apathy even when it's inconvenient. And study the stories of those who have lived this truth. Look at the lives of historical figures, activists, whistleblowers, and ordinary people who, in moments of moral testing, chose the harder but nobler path. Their journeys are not fairy tales, they are roadmaps. The most powerful insight of all, our shared humanity. Now we arrive at what may be the most profound realization in this entire journey, the deep, inescapable interconnectedness of all human beings. Alexander Solzhenitsyn once wrote, "The line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being." That line doesn't separate nations or political parties. It runs through each of us. That realization is both sobering and liberating. It reminds us that none of us are purely good or evil. We are all capable of both harm and healing. And more importantly, we have the power to choose again and again every day. Imagine the impact if we approached our daily lives with this understanding. If instead of judgment, we responded with empathy. If instead of indifference, we chose compassion. Each choice, however small, sends out a signal. This is what I stand for. So the question remains, what kind of signal are you sending? Looking ahead, becoming a force for good. In the final part of our journey, we'll bring everything together: awareness, moral, courage, empathy, reflection, and the heroic imagination, and explore practical, real-life ways to live these values. Because it's one thing to understand these concepts. It's another to embody them in a world that's constantly testing your values. You have more influence than you think, in your family, at work, in your community. Every word, every silence, every choice is a chance to either contribute to the problem or become part of the solution. So stay with me. In the next section, we'll uncover simple yet powerful steps to make sure you're not just resisting the Lucifer effect, but actively reversing it. Because the world doesn't just need fewer villains. It needs more heroes. And the good news is that hero could be you.